Serious, if you could learn the truth of any one mystery, urban legend or conspiracy theory, what would you choose? This won't be answered or even seen, but fuck it. Around July 87 or 88 in Flushing, Queens, New York, I had met another kid whom I had never seen before. It was strange, as I thought I knew every kid in my smallish neighborhood and who went to my school nearby. He was around my age of 8, we both had skateboards, so we skated around our neighborhood for a few hours, and became fast friends. His name was Nicholas. He was small for his age with blonde hair and blue eyes. He was very nice and took to me like he was my long-lost younger brother. He met my family within a few days of hanging out. He would come by my house and call for me. When he finally convinced me to come to his apartment, I was immediately uneasy going inside as it was messy and in a basement. I felt like I might not make it out. I met his grandmother, who for some reason was holding a small whip she called a cat o' nine tails. Tell me how she would whip Nicholas when he came home late, practically blaming me for the abuse he was about to suffer. All I wanted to do was run out of there, but I stayed strong for my buddy and took responsibility so as to save him, and she acquiesced. Within a few days he had me meet his mother, who appeared, even to a young me, to be a drug-addicted prostitute with a pimp-like boyfriend who dressed like Jimi Hendrix. After meeting her, we hung out much less until one night 2 detectives show up at my door telling my parents that Nicholas is missing and the mom was there saying to check our house as if we hid him from them. I was shushed away so I couldn't tell them about the whippings I was told about. I never saw Nicholas or heard about the story again. If you are out there, I hope your life turned out okay, friend. I had just planned my first date with a friend of a friend. He had recently come out to his friends, and then we'd been friends for months, mostly talking online since he was away often for his job. We went to an anime convention together, and he had already come out to me there. He gave the best hugs. We planned to go rock hounding on the mountain, then going to the local gem and mineral show a few days later. This was around the 4th of July. When he didn't show up for the mountain trip, we figured he was stuck at work. He didn't have cell service, and usually didn't get a chance to talk online until his long shifts were over. It was normal to not hear from him for over a week. 2 days later, and a day before the gem and mineral show, I get a call from the friend that introduced us. She tells me he died. Apparently, he'd been dead for an entire week. Because of his job, none of us thought he was missing any more than usual. We got together with all of the friend group to learn the details. They were in an excruciating order from which I'll spare anyone reading this. He had shot himself, and was found a day later in a field heading out of town. He wasn't identified for over a week, since he didn't have any identifying information on him or in his car. He also was unrecognizable. The gun was his father's, but his father lived in a different state and doesn't know how he got it. His mom recently told him to take some old antidepressants because work was making him feel empty inside. He was not out to his parents or coworkers. He was dating my best friend's sister. He received a call while at work. His coworkers said he grew immediately pale and rushed out from work saying he had to leave. None of this was remotely what the person I talked to online talked about. We had one date before all this where he made me dinner. Seeing him in person was rare. He didn't leave a note. His family didn't know who he was, essentially. Their description of him was not accurate of the man I knew. My friends agreed. The friend who introduced us didn't go. There are so many unanswered questions in this mystery that makes closure almost impossible for me. Who called him? What was it about? His parents loved him, but didn't know the real him. I'm so lost. Jennifer Fairgate/Fergit. It's a fascinating mystery, a woman checks into the Oslo Plaza Hotel, a 5-star establishment, and is found dead in her room 3 days later. Initially assumed to have committed a suicide, but there's no blood on her hands, no gunshot residue, no fingerprints on the bullets in the gun or the gun itself, which in addition to the odd position in which she is found on her bed really starts looking more like homicide. Additionally, no personal belongings in the room besides clothes, shoes, a travel bag and an attaché full of bullets. Clothes and shoes have all producer labels/designations removed as well. Contents of her stomach indicate that she had died the day before she was found, but a member of staff who knocked on her door heard a gunshot go off right after that, indicating someone's presence inside. The door was also locked from the inside, but no one was there when they got in. Probably my favorite true crime thing. The Yuba County Five. 5 young mentally handicapped men went missing. They were gone for months without any clues other than a few mysterious phone calls saying not to look for them. Their vehicle was found up on a mountain road a few days after they went missing. It turned on and ran perfectly fine. They were finally found in a trailer deep in the mountains. The strange thing was the one full corpse that was found starved and froze to death when there was plenty of food, water and heat in the trailer to last all 5 boys a year. Some of the food had been eaten, showing that they hadn't had a problem accessing the food. While they did have impairments, they were all independent and would have known how to turn on the heat and get food, call for help. To add the mystery, RHE 5th man's body was never found, and while the others were cognitively impaired, he suffered from schizophrenia and had several disturbing incidents leading up to their disappearance. The full corpse that was found was wearing this man's shoes, but wasn't him. The corpse had been wearing boots the night they disappeared, and it's believed that the man either stole them or talked the other young man into giving him his boots. What happens to the 5th man? Why did the man in the trailer starve to death surrounded by food? Why did the other men leave the trailer and die just hundreds of feet away from it when there was food and warmth so close? Why did they leave the car to begin with? Why didn't they follow the trail back to the road? The disappearance of Lars Mittank in 2014. Read about it somewhere years ago, and it still bothers me sometimes. I try to sum it up. German tourist is on vacation in Croatia, gets into a little bar fight over soccer, gets injured on his ear. Doctor tells him not to fly until fully recovered. Friends leave without him after he insists that he'll be fine without them. He checks into a hotel and suddenly shows serious signs of paranoia, and 1 day later he calls his mother, whispering that he is being followed by 4 men that are trying to kill him. After some time, he can finally fly back and enters the airport, seemingly back to normal. This is covered by the airport cameras. He even talks with someone inside the airport like everything's normal. He then leaves the camera angle for a second with all of his luggage in his hand, and just seconds later he runs full speed out of the airport, leaving his luggage behind just like that. In front of the airport he stands there shortly like he is looking for something, then he continues to run in a specific direction, clips over a decently high fence and disappears in a sunflower field and is never seen again, nor is his body. The most realistic scenario is that he had some kind of concussion or brain damage from the hit that injured his ear, but his friends described him as perfectly normal after the incident. There are so many things weird and not fitting in this case. Most of the media coverage is in German, unfortunately, but if you're really interested, I am sure you'll find a more detailed article or video about it in English. DuPont de Ligonn's murders. Weirdest murder ever. A bunch of shit happened that doesn't make any sense. Father, mother, and 4 children live in a wealthy Nantes suburb. The father registered in a shooting range, bought some lime, cement, shovels, and a hoe. So far it seems like the father is planning on murdering his family, but this is where it gets really weird. On the 3rd of April 2011, the family dined in a restaurant in Nantes. The next day, their 2 kids don't go to school due to illness. He then goes out to the restaurant with his son, who was said to have felt unwell near the end, and that they barely spoke to each other. The next day, on the 5th of April, a friend of Thomas said that they met, played music, and watched some TV. He planned to spend the night, but his father asked him to come back. The next day, Thomas said he was ill and that he couldn't come to class. On the 7th of April, several witnesses claimed to have seen the mother alive. He sends an email to his brother-in-law, saying, "You'll hear more detailed news soon though." On the 11th, the school that two of the children went to received a letter that the father had to go to Australia due to urgent professional changes. The lease on the house had been terminated, all bank accounts had been closed. The house had been completely emptied. The father bought a hotel room in southern France, was spotted a few times, then vanished. On the 22nd of April, the bodies had been found. They were drugged and shot dead with a rifle as they slept. Interestingly, the prosecutor allowed the victims to be buried immediately, and advised relatives to not look at the bodies. At this point, the father has an international arrest warrant over his head. The official time of death was stated to be the 4th to 5th of April for the family, which seems to contradict with witnesses claiming to have seen them in public. Then, in May, the family revealed that they received a letter, dated to the 11th of April. The father claims that he is a DEA agent working in France, and that his family's life was in immediate danger due to his cover being blown, so they are moving to the United States and entering the witness protection program. Well, if I can only pick one, I'm going with Bigfoot. However, I do know of an unsolved mystery where I'm from in Oregon. The legend of Pumpkin Ridge Pete, an old hermit who lived in the hills above North Plains, Oregon. He was known to keep to himself, built a homestead way up in the hills, and literally walked 7 miles each way into town to get supplies. As the story goes, he was ousted from private land where he was living and moved further up the hill. The locals who had evicted him continued to hold a grudge, and one night the youngers found him walking alone on the road and decided to have some fun. They began firing shots at his feet, exclaiming, "Dance, old man, dance," that sort of thing. When one bullet tagged the old man. In a panic, the culprits finished old Pete off, then buried his body somewhere out there in the hills. Since Pete was a well-known fixture of the community, despite being a hermit, a mounted sheriff's posse searched the hills to no conclusion. Pete's body was never found. Subsequently, several years later, one of the supposed gunmen was overheard boasting about the murder in a local bar. Then, not long after, that fellow came to an untimely death when the tractor he was driving mysteriously flipped over on him. This is all well-known local lore in that area. I've personally seen news clippings and other memorabilia. I've even had the privilege of visiting Pete's cabin, on protected private land. Let me tell you, the vibes there are heavy. Yet it's still a mystery, to this day, what really happened to Pete. When I was a kid, at about age 9, I went out jogging shortly after dusk down our street. Small town, I was an outside kid, and played in the woods/outside pretty much all day. It was the late 80s, pretty normal. I was a few blocks from my house on my way back, and sat down on a block or something to rest. It was under a street lamp, and I was catching my breath. Shortly afterwards, while I was still sitting there, a beat-up, faded red pickup truck drove by, and I still remember to this day, the face of the man that was looking at me very strangely as he drove by. Even 9-year-old me knew something was wrong with the way he was looking at me as he drove by. It was a look of opportunity. I watched his taillights go down the road 1 block, and then sure enough, his brake lights came on and he turned left on the block after that. I knew that there were no houses on that block, and no reason he had to turn there other than to come back to where I was. I resumed my jog up the street, because I wanted to be away from where that man saw me. Less than a minute later, his truck turned the corner in front of me, headed straight towards me, very fast. I immediately ran off the road into a field that was next to me, towards a house that was probably 100 yards away, across that field. Adrenaline kicked in and I don't remember much afterwards, but he then turned and drove into the field after me. Apparently, I about broke the back window of that house, pounding on it trying to get the attention of whomever lived there. They ended up taking in a hysterical 9-year-old boy crying and saying that someone was trying to kidnap me, and then drove me the short distance to my house after I told them where I lived. I didn't understand how weird it was at the time, but my parents never called the police or did anything about it. I ask them about it now, and they say that at the time, they thought I was lying about what happened or that I imagined it. So after that long story, I wonder about that man. Who was/is he? Was I a one-time thing that popped into his head as he saw me, or was he a serial abductor and I was just someone that got away? I wonder what would have happened to me had I been abducted that night. I wonder how many other children that man may have abducted. I gotta go with the first ever unsolved mystery that really made me think. Mystery of the Somerton Man. In the 1948 a guy was found dead on a beach in Adelaide, Australia. He was never identified and months after finding his body they found a fake pocket in his pants. It was torn from a copy of the book Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. I googled that, and had a phrase on it which said, Tamam shud, which means ended or finished in Persian. They found the book that it came from, but the owner denied ever knowing the guy. There was an encrypted message in the book that they found and it still hasn't been cracked. Apparently there's been a development recently that might identify him as H.C. Reynolds, but it's not 100% certain. It's super interesting. My grandfather, one day, just walked out the door and never came back. This was before I was born. I'm 27. He left behind my grandmother and his 3 children. There was a statewide search. My mom's family never got closure. Although, me thinks he might have had another family that he ran away to. But it still baffles me sometimes at night. My grandmother finally held a pseudo-funeral/memorial for him last year. My grandma's brother did this in the 30s. Just disappeared. By all accounts, his wife turned very unpleasant, bordering on abusive, after marriage and divorce wasn't a good option in those days. My grandpa traveled a lot for work and supposedly ran into him in Nevada in the late 50s/early 60s. Grandpa worked on military contracts for his company, so he was all over the world until his kids were a little older. He said the guy would never admit it was him, but the bar the guy was running was named after him. His nickname had been Big Ed and the bar was named Big Ed's. It looked like him, and the guy knew a lot about their mutual hometown, Chicago. Supposedly the guy specifically asked him to say hello to my grandma and her sister. My grandpa hadn't mentioned a sister. I keep trying to find record of this bar, but no luck, never got a name on the town. No idea if the story was true or if my grandpa was trying to help my grandma get closure, though he wasn't the type to lie. I worked in hospice for a while. Nearly every single of our verbal patients, and even a few that hadn't been verbal in quite some time, talked to people in the room we couldn't see. You would think it would happen when they were completely out of it, but that wasn't always the case. I remember I was talking to one woman when I was giving her medication in the morning. We knew she was terminal, but there was nothing in her vitals that indicated her death would be soon. We thought she had weeks, or even months left. Anyway, I was talking with her and mid-conversation she sits straight up and starts smiling ear to ear. She was no longer looking at me and instead was looking right next to me. She says, "Oh mama. I've missed you so much," and then starts having a one-sided conversation. I sat there stunned for a few minutes and then backed out of the room while she was still rambling on. She passed the next day. You can't witness the things I have and not believe in some sort of afterlife. Not all these patients were medicated with medication strong enough to cause hallucinations. A lot of the patients were lucid. Most importantly, they all saw loved ones waiting to help them cross over. It's like they were so close to death a veil was lifted. It was beautiful and unsettling at the same time.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.